It's not who we are underneath, but what we review that defines us. Let's talk about Batman Begins.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Daniel, please let the people know what we're going to be discussing or debating about.
So this is Superhero Hall of Fame, in which we talk about the best movies the superhero genre has to offer. This week we're talking about Batman Begins from 2005, which was the beginning of the Nolan trilogy that made a huge impact on the superhero genre back in the day and changed how superhero movies and shows were made for well over a decade. And this is where it all began. So Batman Begins is essentially the origin story of this version of Batman. It starts out explaining how Bruce Wayne lost his parents and how and why he makes the decision to become a Batman. So he goes into exile, travels the world in order to experience life through the eyes of a criminal, in order to better understand crime and criminals. He then comes back to Gotham City and finds it in the iron grip of crime families, and then uncovers a plot by the League of Shadows and Scarecrow to destroy Gotham. So what is your takeaway from Batman Begins, and what's your general thoughts on the movie?
Okay, so I think this might have been the first time I've seen this, or I've probably seen it, but I just don't remember it because there was a lot that was happening in this movie. But I was like, oh crap, like it felt like watching a new movie. So I'm not sure if I've watched it or not. But from the Batman movies I've seen, this one, in comparison to the other Batman movies that I've seen, it went more in depth in terms of Batman himself, so Bruce himself. And I enjoyed kind of seeing his journey before becoming Batman. So I think it was more kind of like emotionally engaging, because with other Batman movies, it kind of just goes straight into it, right? I think it was a good movie. It definitely wasn't one of my favorite Batmans, the ones I've seen, but it was a good watch.
So for me, it's maybe not my favorite version of Batman, but it is my favorite Batman movie. I think there's a couple of different reasons for this, but I think just in terms of how much care it puts into explaining who Bruce Wayne is, why he wants and needs to be Batman, what kind of place Gotham is that would require a Batman. All of that, I think, is very meticulous. Like Christopher Nolan is known for being a very meticulous filmmaker, right? He basically makes, I don't know, construction manuals as movies, right? Like it's very detail oriented, it's very technical. Characters are not really the strong point, and I think this movie also has like a very dispassionate tone a lot of the time, right? There's a lot of somberness, there's a lot of people giving big speeches. It's very light on emotion and, you might say, humanity. But I think as a heightened, stylized story about Bruce Wayne becoming Batman, I think it's borderline flawless. And I even like it more than the others in the trilogy. One of the things that I think really, like, this does like nothing else is really theme. Because the entire movie is underpinned by this idea of fear and identity and what people will do when they're afraid, and things like masks and symbols and that sort of thing, right? So it's very heady in that sense, but I think it, like, everything underpins that, right? Like every line, every major character, every major event kind of ties into these themes in some way, right? Just for example, like this does one of the things right that I think a lot of superhero movies do wrong, which is, in my opinion, a lot of more mediocre superhero movies essentially say, okay, what characters do we have the rights to, and which haven't we used yet, so let's make one of those. We have the rights to Black Adam, we haven't made a Black Adam movie yet, therefore we're making a Black Adam movie, right? That kind of thing. Not to pick just on that character, but that's like one example where it's more driven by like what IPs do we own. And you can see this like when you see these big roadmaps that companies like Disney and Warner Brothers and all of these outfits put out. It's just names of characters. It's not about story. It's not about what is actually happening in this movie. It's just, here's the Wonder Woman one, here's the Blue Beetle one, here's the Black Adam one, right? I've said for a long time that if superhero movies want to be proper movies and want to be overall better, what they need to do is pick villains that support the story you want to tell, and not pick a villain because they haven't been used yet and then just find a story for them. So in this, it's about fear and symbols and power and things like that. And so all the villains tie into the idea of fear in some way. So we have Falcone, the mobster, who rules Gotham through fear. Like everybody's afraid of what he might do if you cross him. And then we've got Ra's al Ghul and the League of Shadows, who use mystery and theatrics and fear to exercise power over people, right? They are not so much about being powerful, they're about kind of working in the shadows and people being afraid of what they might do or what they're capable of doing. And then obviously we have Scarecrow, whose entire thing is causing fear, right? So all of those hang together thematically, and those then tie back to what the story is about, and all of that facilitates a hero who uses fear and the symbol of fear to do good. And I just get a kick out of that, right? The entire thing just hangs together, and the entire thing reinforces each other. These villains were picked very specifically to tell that story specifically. And if you used other villains, you could not tell the same story. And I think that's a huge part of why this movie works.
I do agree with the point that you made in terms of like especially a lot of like superhero movies, where they go wrong is they have an IP, but they haven't got a story yet. So it's like they're missing the drama. So when I say drama, I don't necessarily mean like the action, etc., etc. I mean drama as in like when you watch a drama movie, it relies on having a good story. And I think that's what a lot of these super movies are missing, which is the drama. And the drama is the core of actually, and I think a lot of them, I don't know what it is, but I think, is it a thing where these filmmakers think, let's just give them like a whole theatrical CGI fest and the story won't really mean as much, which is like, that's not true whatsoever. Like for me, like Godzilla -1, for example, what separates that Godzilla from other Godzilla movies is that had a really good story. Even though the CGI, I didn't have an issue with the CGI, but you could tell that CGI in that movie wasn't as good as the other, as the other Godzilla movies, right? But why that was better than the other Godzilla movies, because it had a good story. So I think that's what a lot of these movies are missing. I think that's what Batman had. It had a really good story. It was very cohesive. Like there's just the story structure, everything linked to, like you said, the themes. So it did have the best story out of all the Batmans that we have seen.
It's just a very clean story, right? Like we talked about how the villains tie into the theme, and that same theme informs what Bruce Wayne does and why he does it. A large chunk of this is Bruce Wayne assembling the Batman persona, right? The costume and the gimmicks and the Batmobile and all of these things, like the Bat Signal gets invented in this. And all of it is like very gradually and very meticulously justified, where you say, okay, this is not simply there because that's what we know from the comics. One little thing is that, why does he have the bat ears? Looks kind of silly, right? But there's a radio antenna in there. So he needs to have a radio, and he needs to cover up the antenna in some way. And so that's why he has these large bat ears, just as one small example. The bat signal does not simply exist because somebody back in 1940 had the idea and it stuck around since then. It's because that is as much of a signal to the criminals as it is to Batman that he is needed, right? Like if you are a criminal in Gotham City and you see the bat signal, that is supposed to instill fear in your heart, right? So it all kind of ties together. Every time something is added, right? Like, and this goes in stages too. In the beginning, he's just wearing a ski mask, and then he's got a rudimentary version of the costume, and then at exactly the halfway mark, he's assembled his costume, and we see him for the first time. I think that's when he goes after the mobsters, and there's this wonderful scene where he's essentially stalking them like a slasher villain, and one by one they disappear into the shadows, because he grabs them and knocks them out and so on, right? I think that is and then at some point he lands on a car, on a crate or something. It's the first time we see the fully realized Batman costume. And at this point, we no longer need to justify why he looks like this, because we just spent almost an hour justifying it. One of the things that kind of makes people maybe dismiss Batman Begins a little bit is that it sounds kind of boring. Like, okay, not only are we doing an origin story, which many people think is overdone, which I disagree with. I think this shows that a good origin story can be very compelling if the origin is the point of the movie, right? But also the slow justification of each part of the costume and the persona is the plot of the movie, where he realizes what he needs to do to actually accomplish his mission. And he has some setbacks, like there's this thing where he has to source each part from a different company, and he has to order like 10,000 pieces at once, so it doesn't look suspicious. And then one of them gives, like, I think the mask is like substandard quality, and so he has to scrap it and try again, and there's a whole process to it. It's very technical. It's very methodical. But I think as we kind of see the Batman persona take shape during it, and so in the second half, when he's then fully realized and he does Batman things, we believe it. That's one of the big things about the Nolan trilogy, that is that it's supposed to be like very grounded and very realistic. And I have some thoughts on that later on. But he does pretty outrageous things in the second half. But I believe it at that point because I've watched this guy figure it out for solid half of the first half of the movie. And just in terms of making it believable that somebody would dress up as a bat to fight crime, this is like a giant exercise in justifying that, right? And to me, it succeeds. Not like if it's really realistic or anything like that, but I can follow. Like it sells me on the idea that this guy would do this, and then I see the process of it happening.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand the symbolism of the bat. So was there any symbolism of the bat itself, or was it just basically he became Batman because of what happened to him when he was a child? Because at first, so when he was like in the cave and then the bats were kind of like swirling around him, I was like, okay, and then that was him kind of like the cue for him to become, the cue for his suit, so for him to become Batman. But I said to myself, isn't this a bit random? Is there like a deeper symbolism behind this? Because it can't be that like straightforward. Because it's kind of similar to, remember the argument that you made with the Green Goblin, and you said, why was the Green Goblin designed the way that he was designed? With Batman, it's like,
why does like a tech billionaire, why does he dress up as a Green Goblin to do his thing, right? Why green? Why a goblin? That sort of thing. And I do think it's a little bit different because the bats are in fact creatures of the night. They are scary. They are intimidating, right? If you encounter bats like at night, like you're gonna be startled at least. They're kind of silent and they kind of sweep up on you, and suddenly you see something in the corner of your eyes, and you're a little bit startled because you didn't expect it. That's part of it. The other part of it is that he is afraid of bats, and so by becoming the thing he fears, he becomes a symbol or like the incarnation of fear.
Yeah,
that's kind of the idea, right?
Okay.
And like obviously he chooses the bat because he's Batman, right? Like we know, like this was decided in the 40s, obviously. But just in terms of within the logic of this movie, I think it works. Like it convinces me. There's no point where I say, okay, this is just clear nonsense and I just have to roll with this if I want to enjoy the movie. I think because the movie spends so much time on justifying it, and like he explains it to himself, he explains it to Alfred. I think it works.
Okay, I hear it. And you know what? Because I think you mentioned a point before as well where you said this movie is kind of, I wouldn't say dismissed, but it's not put in the same, it's not acknowledged as well as the other Batman movies. I think that might be, you said this before, where how like superhero movies were kind of like, well, superheroes and capes was kind of like a joke. The tone of this one felt drastically different from Dark Knight Rises. Dark Knight Rises felt a bit more punchy, impactful in a way that it was like, in terms of that tone, was way more darker, right? This one, like I said, was more family friendly. And I wonder why. I understand there's evolution to his character, so it makes sense that it kind of like took that jump. But I wonder why he didn't start off with the same tone in Dark Knight Rises, because the subject matter, Batman, the beginning, is dark. So it's like, maybe if he took the same approach that he did for Dark Knight Rises in this movie, maybe it could have been seen in a better light. I think for me, the reason why I didn't feel it was, just like I said, I acknowledge that the story is one of the greatest, probably the greatest of the Batman franchise. However, in terms of why it didn't have that much of an impact on me in comparison to other movies, like it was just very cohesive especially when it comes to like executing the themes and having things connect. I agree. However, it was missing what Dark Knight Rise had, which was like, I remember the scene between Bane and the fight scene between Bane and Batman. Like it was like watching someone get tortured. I think that was what was missing from this Batman. Is like it was missing that sort of like that uncomfortability it provides sometimes when it comes to, when it comes to like fight scenes, or even when it comes to like like the internal conflict, like dilemmas that sometimes Batman go through. And I think maybe one scene was when he was gonna go and kill the guy that killed his father. That was probably one scene I was like, oh, that's a scene that I can like, that kind of touched me, because I can understand that scene. But
Dark Knight Rises is like the third part in the trilogy, right? Like things have escalated since then. It's just a little bit more grounded, right? Like dealing with corrupt cops and mobsters, and Crane is like a guy in a suit for the first half of the movie. He doesn't put on his mask until quite a bit later on, right? So I can kind of see, like if you compare that with the other two in the trilogy, I can kind of see it being maybe a bit basic. You could like, I think if you're just looking at like the optics of it, I think it can come across as a little bit basic. But I actually think this movie is actually quite comic booky. There's a lot of stuff in it that is actually more heightened than I think people give it credit for. So I've just made a list of a little bit. So like things that appear in this movie: magic ninja, a fear toxin that causes hallucinations, villains poisoning the water supply, Batman summons a bat swarm as a distraction maneuver at one point. There's a rooftop car chase, and there's also the bat signal, which is.
But the water supply one, we didn't really see, unless I missed it. We didn't really see the effect of it though.
Of what?
The water supply.
But that's the plan, right? That's the classic comic book thing. Like the Joker's putting poison in the water supply. Like that's the most like after the bank heist. That's the most archetypical superhero story, and it happens in this movie, right? Like this is not just about corrupt politicians and mobsters. This is like a guy dressed up as a Scarecrow gets hired by maybe immortal ninjas to put fear poison in the water supply. That's more comic booky than anything else that's happened in half the superhero movies in the past decade. And it gets this reputation as being so grounded and realistic and maybe a little bit boring, like in terms of not much exciting superhero stuff happens in it. But like that's a whole bunch of stuff. But it's like played by real actors, and they talk about it as if it was real, like as if this was the most normal thing, right? Like Ducard, right? The Liam Neeson character. That guy could be in any superhero cartoon or comic book. Like the character design would look a little bit more fantastical, maybe, if this was in the comics. But just in terms of how he talks and what his plan is and his personality, like all of it is quite heightened. So I actually like watching this movie again. I was kind of reminded of actually, no, this is not simply Batman learns how to make the costume and then fights the mob. Right? There's more to this.
No, of course, I agree to that. There's definitely way more to that. Definitely, I agree to it. I even enjoyed like the whole villain objective and goal of kind of like self-sabotage and self-destruction. Of course, it's influenced with the whole gas and obviously the powers that come with it, but still, like kind of, like already, like, Gotham, the way Gotham's been described as like this, whole evil place that's, like it needs to be, it's kind of similar to, it's not similar to the story of Noah, but like, how God acknowledges that.
It is the same story, right? The world is corrupt, so if we cleanse it, and then whoever is left afterwards needs to rebuild better.
And it falls in place. Story. And obviously the realism comes with the whole conspiracy theories that how, sometimes when they say governments are responsible for a lot of the bad stuff that happens. So of course, well, they're not really the government, but they're in a way like a representation of the whole conspiracy theorists when it comes to like, the rich being responsible for like a lot of the bad stuff that happens around the world and the government, etc., etc.
The only thing they're responsible for is being negligent, right? They've allowed this corruption to fester and they're benefiting from it in the sense that they remain rich, but they kind of are able to retreat into their mansions, and Bruce Wayne could do the same thing, right? But like they're not causing it necessarily. They're just being negligent and not being involved. Like that's what set Thomas Wayne aside. And I think this might be the most screen time Thomas Wayne has received, at least at the time, because a fair amount of time goes into like Thomas Wayne is essentially what if a wealthy person just tries to do the right thing and it doesn't work. Like even with all the money in the world, you're still just one person. You're still powerless against the corruption, and that goes towards justifying the superhero thing, right? Because if Bruce Wayne just bankrolled like electoral campaigns of the right people and donated to charities and whatever, he would end up the same way as Thomas Wayne, right? And we see Thomas Wayne's legacy throughout the entire movie, right? This monorail kind of thing. That was Thomas Wayne's big legacy, right? That was supposed to be the thing that fixes Gotham because it makes getting around Gotham easier for people on low incomes, right? Because it's cheap, reliable transit. And that was his big project. And it wasn't enough. Like 20 years later, it's just as run down and as decrepit as anything else. That goes towards justifying, like, this is always one of those things in superheroes where it doesn't actually solve any problems by realistic standards. Just putting on a costume and fighting crime does not solve any problems, really. But I think a Batman movie like this, whose mission it is to justify why somebody like Batman exists, Like that's supported by this, right? Like that Thomas Wayne did everything right. He did everything in his power. He did more than anybody else could have, and did nothing. This movie really does its homework, right? Like there's a scene where Bruce Wayne confronts Falcone, right? And he says, "You haven't thought about your butler. You haven't thought about, your lady friend. What about them?" That's not explicitly said, but that is one of those moments that convinces Bruce Wayne that he needs to be a symbol. And he says in other points too, like, if I'm a man, I can be killed. If I'm a symbol, I'm invincible. So I don't think it quite rises to the level of actually justifying superheroes, but I think within the logic of a superhero world, I think it gives enough reasons for why this is the case. Like for why the symbolism, why the mask, why the secret identity, why you don't just simply use your money for philanthropy. Like why put on a costume to go fight crime? And it's because the people who you need to fight are magic ninjas and evil psychiatrists, that sort of thing. So I think if it's just about making this believable, I think this movie succeeds on every level, I think.
I don't think I'd seen this one in a while, and typically whenever I watch the Nolan trilogies, this is kind of the one that kind of falls by the wayside. You always kind of go back to The Dark Knight or The Dark Knight Rises. So it was actually kind of good to just kind of like refresh myself on this, and I thought seeing how the Batman is sort of kind of like built and sort of come about, I thought was all sort of all great. And then of course you've got sort of everything that kind of comes after that. You've got sort of all the action and sort of how we sort of slowly incorporating, slowly intimidating and sort of kind of like spreading fear among sort of the criminals in this movie. Even like his whole like kind of like interactions with like all of the side characters. I feel like this is again another sort of superhero movie where all of the side characters are working sort of really well to kind of like help sort of kind of like shape and enhance sort of who sort of Bruce Wayne is and who sort of Batman is in this. Special shout outs to like Alfred, just the way that he's like kind of like to be honest, at first I thought sort of the way that he was like immediately on board with him being Batman without kind of like questioning it too much about sort of him sort of going out there and beating people up, as people say, was a bit like would there not be a little bit of a pushback from him in terms of like, would there be like him kind of maybe, especially being close to Thomas Wayne, almost being like, this is like the other ways that you could do it. This is how like kind of like your father was trying to do it and this and the other. But kind of like past that point, I feel like sort of everything that he was kind of contributing to sort of to Bruce Wayne's journey was just like great. It was fantastic.
I mean, he's basically devoted himself to just serving the Waynes, and Bruce is the last Wayne, right? So I think at that point, he thought Bruce was dead for 7 years, right? So he's not. First of all, he's not in the position to argue, right? Like that's not his place as far as Alfred is concerned. But also, what else is he gonna do? I think Alfred is maybe not the most active character in this. He's kind of there to support Bruce, but he's always kind of the conscience on his shoulder, right? Like pointing out when he goes too far or when he goes in the wrong direction, or encouraging him to do something better or differently, or pointing out things that maybe Bruce hadn't considered, and all of these. Like he's not really there to have much agency. He's there to be the angel on his shoulder, right?
Yeah, the voice of reason.
Voice of reason, yeah. As long as we're going through the supporting cast, Lucius Fox, I think, is great as well, because that also underlines, similar to Thomas Wayne, this underlines why Bruce cannot simply run the company, right? Why simply running the company in a way that brings jobs to Gotham and so on is not enough, because anybody who tries gets dumped in applied sciences. Right, like, and the people who are in charge are not interested in any of this, right? They're not interested in actually doing anything with the resources of the company. And I actually kind of enjoyed that they were not cartoonishly evil. Like this one guy, what's his name, who was kind of the adversary, like in the boardroom, who gets kicked out in the end. I think he was just like a cutthroat executive. But if we're not thinking about that, he's talking to Bruce Wayne, he's just running a company. He's kind of doing kind of more or less sensible things for the most part. We don't really see him do anything like cartoonishly stupid or ridiculous or anything like that.
I was gonna say, I feel like that's why they maybe made him a little bit more harsher towards Lucius Fox towards the end of the movie, just to kind of like reaffirm that actually maybe he isn't completely a nice guy, because like you were saying throughout the movie, I didn't really think he was doing anything
He's not a nice
bad.
guy, but he's just
Yeah.
a cutthroat.
He's just like a
Like he just wants to make money.
yeah.
He wants to be rise as high in the company as he can, right? And
Mhm.
and people like Bruce Wayne and Lucius Fox are in the way of that. And that's kind of the extent of it.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then we've got Rachel Dawes, right? Who is the example of what does an honest, good person look like in Gotham, and why can't she make a difference? And that kind of parallels with Jim Gordon. I don't know if Rachel Dawes is a new invention for this. I think she might be. But James Gordon is similar, right? He's the one honest cop in a city full of corrupt cops, right? So this entire supporting cast is geared towards supporting the central point of the movie, which is justifying Batman and showing why somebody like Batman would exist or should exist in a place like this. So I think it just really works on that level, and like none of it is genius, right? Like everything Rachel does is kind of obvious. Like there's no big surprises or anything like that. She's just a good person trying to do a good job, and she's the kind of person who should be or who benefits from Batman overturning the status quo, right? So I think the supporting cast does its job here as well. One of the things that I read that really sticks out to me when it comes to this movie compared to what superhero movies are like today is that it has a lot of things in it and spends a lot of time justifying things that have kind of been completely dropped by pretty much the entire genre, at least as far as movies are concerned. So one of them is the secret identity. Like how many major characters and like superheroes in movies actually have a secret identity these days? Like Batman, Superman also. On the Marvel side, nobody. I don't think anybody has. Like Spider-Man is the one guy who has a secret identity, right? But like this whole idea of secret identities and code names and stuff like that has just been dropped. And I think it's kind of refreshing to go back to this movie, which predates all of that, but only by a few years, right? Iron Man comes out 3 years after this, and it just does the secret identity. Like there's a cave under Wayne Manor, and you can access it by playing the right notes on the piano, and then a bookshelf opens, and then there's like this elevator that goes down into the Batcave. It's completely ridiculous. It's very comic book, and this movie just makes us believe in the Batcave, right? And then there's the themed gimmicks, like why are his throwing stars shaped like bats? Because he wants to send a message, and because he wants the criminals to know that he was there. It's not simply about getting the job done. It's about sending a message and scaring the right people. And then he's got a hideout, which is like, it's a little bit justified where I said the Waynes were kind of part of the Underground Railroad back in the Civil War, and that's why these structures exist. But ultimately, it's a cave. It's the Batcave, right? It's very comic booky again. And what modern superheroes have a hideout?
On that last one, I don't think superheroes have necessarily a hideout, but they all kind of have some type of like base of operations kind of thing. Like, I mean, we saw it in the recent Captain America movie where I don't know where like the Falcon
that's just
was
a place.
like working out. It's just, yeah, to me, it's not like a super, yeah, to be honest, it's not a set kind of like location, like, you know, in the Justice League they have like the Justice League Tower, whatever like that. And I think in Avengers they did have like the Avengers Tower, and they also did have like the Avengers compound, but I don't think they spent, you know, too much time there as like base of operations. But
they weren't they weren't secret, right? This entire thing of the double, like anything that ties into the double identity and into keeping things hidden is very rare. Like I think off the top of my head, Spider-Man is the only one who does it in the MCU. And here it's a very big part of it, right? And it's because this whole thing about being a symbol and not being a person and being, like, on some level, that's probably the most realistic part of the superhero genre, right? Because like special forces types and like SWAT teams wear masks because otherwise there might be reprisals against their families, right? Like that's kind of ironic. So in order to make the superhero genre more respectable, we drop the one thing that makes sense about superheroes, which is the anonymity in the masks. And also like code names that used to be hokey, but today people go by their screen names, right? So that is less ridiculous than it has ever been, I think. And yet the superhero genre has dropped these things. And kind of the only thing that's really missing from this movie is the sidekick. And in the entire trilogy, like it gets kind of teased in the third one, where this cop might be Robin. Like he never is, but like as you're watching it, he might be set up as Robin. But that's the only time we see a sidekick. Otherwise, sidekicks are completely absent from this as well. And I think I still think Robin could have been made to work if Nolan really tried, but just that's where Nolan drew the line, apparently. So I just find it interesting that this grounded, realistic superhero movie does more of these, like actually does almost all of the traditional tropes that superheroes are known for, and that we really haven't seen very much of, like the past 10, 15 years.
I was gonna ask, in terms of like the secret identity stuff, because like I was like trying to like rattle through like Marvel movies and stuff like that. Do you like in terms of like comic book movies sort of today's age, how like really essential is it to sort of make it feel like a comic book type of movie? And I understand like the whole it being to kind of like protect your loved ones and it being simple and set and the other, but I was like trying to like think of like movies where it's not been there and whether like it is as like as needed anymore as sort of kind of like it was earlier on, and sort of and like to be honest as well, in my knowledge of like the Marvel characters in sort of in the comic books, I don't know how many of them have sort of that strong secret identity out of the ones that we've seen anyways in some of the MCU. So like I'm talking like Avengers or things like the Fantastic Four kind of coming up, because I know they're especially for the Fantastic Four, they're sort of especially known in sort of the comics for not sort of having any secret identity. So it's just like, as you're saying that, and you could sort of compare it to like modern movies, it's like, how much of a miss is it, do you feel, like they're not being these secret identities?
So the MCU could have had more. Like Thor in the comics has a secret identity, where he's just some guy who lives among humans and then he transforms into Thor as he needs to. So they cut that out on purpose. And there's at least some characters could have had them if they wanted to. I don't think it was ever needed exactly, but I think it's just part of the charm and part of the conceit that if we're going to have these costumes, part of that is hiding your identity. And then the question is, why do you hide your identity and how and what are the effects of that? And so on. It's not like it's not proper superhero movies anymore because they don't use secret identities anymore. But it's like this entire side of the genre that's kind of fallen by the wayside. On paper, it makes it more realistic and more grounded, right? And maybe people think it would be a little more hokey if these characters actually used their code names as opposed to their real names. And I just don't think that has anything to do with anything. I think that's just part of the genre conceits and part of the conventions. I just found it refreshing to see all that stuff on display here and then justified within the story.
I will add, actually, in sort of kind of being in support of the secret identity kind of coming back, it does add a level of emotion for me anyways, as sort of the audience, in this movie, for example, where Batman's interacting with Rachel throughout all of this, whether he's saving her, whether he's just kind of helping her out, or even at the very end where he gives her the hint that actually I am Bruce Wayne underneath this mask, just in case he does die. It adds a level of like wanting them to kind of like find out and wanting them to know, because especially in this movie where Rachel had seen sort of Bruce come back, but the first interaction was seeing him kind of being this like drunk playboy billionaire, whatever, with these two models, and the whole time that he's doing good for the city. And if she did know that, she probably would have some level of support for it. So I don't know. For me, anyways, that moment at the end where he gave her the hint based on what she had said to him initially, I don't know. It felt rewarding. It felt good. And likewise, even in the Spider-Man movie, the latest one, where Doctor Strange casts a spell where everyone forgets who Spider-Man is, and then you have that moment where at the end of the movie where he goes into the shop and he's kind of like there buying sort of whatever from Zendaya, who's serving behind the till. And there's like that moment of he wants to tell her, but then he's also sort of seen the scar from the last time like she was involved with Spider-Man. And it just like has that emotional pull for whatever reason. Like I can't explain why, but it just kind of like hits in the right way anytime there is that interaction between someone that is the superhero and the person that is like close to them, the loved ones that doesn't know. And yeah, it's just that whole interaction. It just, I don't know, it works for me as an audience member.
Yeah, and I think anything can be made obligatory, right? Like if every superhero has to do this, and we have to do this over and over again, and we have scene after scene in which the hero has to hide who they are from the people they care about, and maybe seems like they are, a disappointment, or where they have to pretend they're not as noble as they really are because they cannot tell the other person, right? Like this whole thing about Bruce wants to tell Rachel that he's a better person than she thinks he is. But there is, at that point at least, and like until the end of the movie, there's nothing he can do to convince her of this, right? Like he has to play this role in public, and that means she has to believe that he is this drunken playboy, right? And I think that is just part of the character, I think, and part of the charm. And as long as it's in service of the story and the character, I think it can absolutely work. This movie is all about justifying it, right? This movie is all about, okay, what if we actually took this seriously? What if we got some world-class actors and one of the best filmmakers and actually tried to take this story seriously? Tell a story about a guy who wants to fix the world by putting on a bad costume and going after the bad people. Like, what if that actually was taken seriously as anything else, like any crime drama or anything like, or political story or anything like that? Like, I think that is really the thing that makes this movie in particular work, is that it just takes these characters seriously and it takes all these tropes seriously, and then it just tries to do them as best as possible. And there's like one or two things like the sidekick where Nolan said, okay, that's just too much. That's why I draw the line, but I'm gonna do what I can. And then we get things that are actually quite close to the comics in terms of what actually happens and what people do and why, not so much in terms of what characters look like and how fantastical things look on screen. But if we actually consider what's actually happening, it's actually quite heightened. And the double identity and having to hide the hero's nobility from the people they care about and all of these ideas, it makes an appearance here. And in that context, it makes perfect sense.
So I do agree. It shouldn't be done in every film.
However, and that's for everything, right? Like there's nothing that should be obligatory in that sense, right? Like anything can be overdone, anything can be misapplied. It's like a toolbox, right? This stuff is a toolbox, and you need the right tool for the right job. If you do that, then you get something like Batman Begins. To wrap it up, is Batman Begins a good superhero movie, and would you recommend Batman Begins to somebody who wants to be convinced that superhero movies are actually good?
If you do kind of get your enjoyment out of like a good story, having like pieces connect to the theme and just like the cohesiveness and stuff, then I definitely say Batman Begins is for you. The only reason why I'm a bit hesitant of saying yes all the way is because I think people might kind of be like me when it comes to the whole tone of things, right? Because like, for example, like there's a big difference between like, like the evolution of Batman in terms of, because I think you said before it started off like a comedy, and now like the latest Batman, it's proper like dark. It just depends on what you like. And I think people might, who knows, people like if they're kind of getting into like the whole superhero genre, I'm scared people might think, oh, this is just a guy in a cape. They might have the kind of like the same opinions that people had before on superhero films when they thought it was a bit funny and mature. It wasn't really something to be taken serious of.
I'm a little bit the same in terms of not 100% recommending it all the way, just because I know this one compared to other superhero movies, it's a little bit more patient, and it takes its time to properly craft its character, properly sort of start to craft its story and build up Batman from a young boy who's sort of not experienced his parents being murdered to the story of how he becomes and why he becomes Batman. So I feel like that initial portion of the movie could turn some people off, especially if you're looking for something that's a little bit more faster paced and a little bit more linear and kind of like streamlined, like other movies that we've done, for example, Spider-Man 2002. But if you do have the patience for it, and if you do have the time to just like experience like a really well-crafted story that just happens to be a superhero movie, then 100% this is a great place to start for, if that's what you're looking for. So I think I'll agree with Jonathan in terms of it's very dependent on what you're looking for out of a superhero movie, just because this one's a lot more intentional, a lot more just patient in its build-up and patience in just crafting a great story with great characters, I would say.
So I think this is one of the greatest superhero movies ever made. I think it really excels on two levels. One of them is theme, right? The theme of fear and symbols and justice. Every aspect of this, the main character, the supporting character, the villains, the iconography, the costumes, everything is permeated by these three ideas. I can't think of another superhero movie that does theme better than this. And second of all, it justifies all of the tropes and trappings of superhero stories that maybe seem a little bit hokey. Everything from the costume to the secret identity to the gimmicks, everything in this is justified, but not in a tedious way. It's really masterful how it combines those things with the story of Bruce Wayne, right? So we said before that good superhero movies should be focused on the character's journey and explaining why they do what they do and why they do it in that way. Because that sets apart superheroes from other regular characters. And this movie just does that, right? It justifies every step of how a scared orphan turns into the Dark Knight, right? And it justifies every step of the way, but it's not simply a checklist. It's not simply, let's watch him assemble a costume for an hour. It's interwoven with the character journey where, as he assembles the costume and decides on the iconography of Batman, he actually becomes Batman, right? He's not fully formed. He starts off with an idea and a desire for justice, and then he becomes Batman in order to realize that. And the costume is kind of like a tangible metaphor for that. I think a lot of superhero movies kind of skip that, and we've certainly lost that. Like, I don't know the last time we saw like that sequence in Iron Man where Iron Man puts together the suit. Like, that is something that I've not seen in a superhero movie in a long time. We kind of skip right to the part where they have a costume and powers. And this movie is just, let's justify all of it and use that as building blocks to support a character and his psychology and why he does what he does and why he does it that way. And I think no superhero movie, there are other good origin stories, Spider-Man 2002 being one of them, and I could list a few more. But I think on that level, nothing has surpassed Batman Begins, in my opinion. And that is why I think it's up there as even like, especially as an introductory superhero movie, where if somebody needs to be sold on these ideas and maybe like has never understood why they're there or why that is part of the genre, I think after watching Batman Begins, you'll have a pretty good idea. So that's why that's a strong recommend for me.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for joining into today's discussion. A very good discussion, you know what I'm saying, with differences of opinion-ish. Honey.
Let us know your thoughts down below in the comment section. What are your thoughts on Batman Begins? How does it rank up against the rest of the movies in the trilogy itself? Do you hold it in higher regard than some other people do in the trilogy? Let us know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And of course, if you like what we talked about today, tell a friend. And if you hated everything we talked about, tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, thank you very much, guys. And we will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.